There are just two persons that I am currently speaking with. I've reduced it to just two. All right, all right. Additionally, both she and he are pleasant. However, all I really wanted to do was confirm that these individuals were regular folks. I also mentioned to my therapist the other day that I'm finding it difficult to open up because they're not narcissistic. Whispers persisted for years, there were murmurs for years, and there was quiet for years. But now that Tasha K has finally spoken, her accusations have shocked the reality TV industry. When Porsha Williams officially disclosed her sexual orientation a few days ago, a large portion of the internet portrayed it as self-discovery, progress, and healing. However, rumors that are currently making the rounds suggest that story may only tell half the truth. According to sources, Porsha's apparent awakening is actually the subtle disclosure of a double existence that has been going on for years. Alleged relationships with women in addition to men. Screenshots, moments from reality shows, old party footage, and other items that were previously written off as hearsay are now being re-examined as part of a much wider pattern. At this point, the narrative takes a more sinister turn. Because Tasha K is pointing to what she says is a very significant health situation that may have been kept out of the public view, rather than only accusing infidelity. Claims pertaining to risk, secrecy, and the private concerns of those close to Porsha long before the public was aware of them. The internet is divided now. This is clout chasing, according to some. Some claim that something doesn't add up when so many people start saying the same thing, because sexuality is no longer the only issue here. It has to do with trust. It has to do with treachery. It also discusses what occurs when purported secrets refuse to be hidden. And this is the most troubling question of all. Why is the noise growing louder if none of this is true? This story isn't finished, and what happens next might be far more explosive. The music stops, the screen goes dark, and writing appears on the screen. Nothing at all like I mentioned. However, there was something about this discussion that kind of caught my attention, because she began discussing how she believed I was gay due to my marriage. I would think about being gay. You don't think about being gay, but go ahead, Porsha. Lonely? You know I can't relate to other men. People are attempting to introduce me, but it's simply not the same. This time, I'm going to approach it differently. Until I'm whole, I'm going to go on my own. I shall, reopen myself once I'm entirely in order to avoid repeating the same error. You're like, I don't like anybody, after a particularly difficult split. You say things like, I don't like nobody. As I sat there, I wondered if I liked women enough. Is it possible for me to date a woman who can enter and experience this boy, for example, like someone? For years, Porsha Williams cultivated a reputation for being resilient. I have to be able to sit with someone and feel that way. A woman who endured heartbreak. A lady who emerged from failed marriages with greater strength. A woman who consistently got back on her feet despite the controversies. Now that picture is being examined under a microscope. Because although Porsha's recent remarks regarding her sexuality were initially interpreted by the internet as a sign of sensitivity and healing, new accusations are compelling people to pose more difficult questions. Was this damage control or genuine self-discovery? Porsha's decision to speak publicly at this time did not happen overnight, according to people with knowledge of the matter. It was the result of years of murmurs that would not go away. Whispers about private lives that differed greatly from what viewers were shown, whispers about relationships that were never captured on television, and whispers about behavior that occurred behind closed doors. Tasha K then joins the discussion at that point. This is not being presented by Tasha K as a breakthrough. She is portraying it as an untimely revelation. She claims that what Porsha is now referring to as healing is something that many in her immediate vicinity supposedly observed years ago, not as growth, but as a pattern. Emotional detachment in relationships was part of this tendency, a trend that featured inexplicable separations and, according to some accounts, purported intimacy with women long before the public was ever included in that discussion. The timing, not just the accusation itself, is what makes this situation so tense. Because a few days after Porsha's self-discovery was praised online, detractors started pointing out something alarming. Her statement sounded more like an explanation than a discovery. Since I've made the decision to stop looking for it, I believe that it will arrive, as you know. Therefore, since this is probably also a part of healing, I won't force myself to date or try to figure out who I like or who I could be around. Sitting with this, sitting by myself, sitting with the loss, and allowing myself to heal the loss is what I mean. I feel fantastic every day, even if I know I'm crying right now. I grow better every day. I get stronger every day. However, she clarifies that she no longer wishes to look for a connection. She claims that she is opting to be by herself. She discusses grief, healing, and emotional tiredness. She acknowledges that it's challenging. She acknowledges that she weeps. She acknowledges that she now experiences loneliness on a regular basis. It seems sincere at first glance. However, detractors contend that this was not a healing moment. It has to do with changing the story. Because the emphasis shifts to feeling, sorrow, vulnerability, and isolation instead of particular rumors or prior actions, and that change is important. When explanation becomes risky, emotion frequently takes its place in media strategy. Analysts claim that this is a traditional redirection strategy. You humanize rather than deny or confirm. And initially, at least, it was successful. The interview's clips quickly went viral on social media. She was praised by fans for her bravery. Supporters applauded her for making her own decision, while others weren't persuaded because they had been silently observing something else take place. Screenshots appeared again. Moments from previous reality shows were replayed. When seen via a new lens, party film from years ago suddenly took on a distinct appearance. Moments that were formerly written off as comedy. Some people now saw interactions that were previously dismissed as lighthearted as parts of a much bigger picture. Sources close to production circles claim that there were long-running discussions about Porsha's actions that were never broadcast, as well as discussions about boundaries, blurred lines, and cast members who reportedly felt uneasy, but chose to remain silent to avoid criticism. These rumors were never verified. They were never turned down. They just remained underground up until this point. At this point, the story becomes more sinister since Tasha K is claiming exposure in addition to infidelity. She asserts that several of Porsha's closest associates were secretly worried about more than just cheating. They were purportedly concerned about health hazards that were never made public. These are significant allegations that are carefully worded. No documents have been made available to the public. The accusation alone has been sufficient to completely change the tone of the discussion, even if no medical records have been presented. Identity is no longer a factor in this. This has to do with accountability. Sources claim that concerns were voiced behind closed doors over the extent to which those associated with Porsche were aware of the risks. These inquiries were purportedly reduced, disregarded, or dismissed. At this point, the conversation gets really awkward. Because if even a small portion of these assertions are accurate, trust, rather than sexuality, is the topic of discussion. Critics accuse Tasha K of being careless, pursuing attention, and taking advantage of a delicate subject. Her defenders, however, make a very different argument. They contend that the internet has broken down because identical accusations emerge from a variety of sources, including former partners, business insiders, and now media figures. According to one side, this is a targeted smear campaign, a vicious assault driven by power and resentment. The other viewpoint holds that silence has provided too much protection for too long. Because this is the detail that keeps coming up. This didn't happen overnight. These rumors weren't new. These were ancient discussions given fresh life. Critics contend that Porsche may have miscalculated how intently people were observing when she decided to speak at this time and presented everything as healing. Because stories don't vanish in the era of digital memory and stored video. Rather, they wait. Legal experts have already started speculating about possible repercussions. Not because of what has been demonstrated, but rather because of what is inferred. Preemptive declarations, silent settlements, and cease and desist letters. When accusations gain this degree of public attention, these are the typical following steps. However, as of right now, there has only been quiet, no formal denial, no lawsuit, no direct legal reaction, and no explanation. Furthermore, silence is never neutral in situations like this, because something else keeps getting louder while statements are still missing. Fear. Fear that there is more video. Fear of secret messages coming to light. Fear that those who previously remained silent might decide they are done defending the reputation of others. It has to do with positioning. Porsche presented herself as a healer. Tasha K presented herself as revealing, and as the most unsettling issue is yet unanswered, the audience is left in the midst, attempting to determine which version feels closer to the reality. Why hasn't it been shut down if all of this is untrue? How long before the next leak pushes the debate in an uncontrollable direction, if even a portion of it is true? Because what was once a discussion about identity has evolved into something quite else. When the quiet eventually breaks, it's a test of credibility, accountability, and the number of secrets that may remain hidden. And this is just the beginning of the tale. The narrative had progressed beyond mending by the time the discussion got to this stage. It had become contradictory. Because even though Porsha Williams presented her latest remarks as a sign of personal development, detractors started bringing up something far more awkward: her background. Not out-of-context jokes or outdated tweets, but recorded public declarations. At that point, the story started to fall apart. The fact that Porsche discussed her sexual orientation is not the problem, according to those who are studying the case. The problem is how far that discussion deviates from her prior public position. At this point, Tasha K becomes an accuser instead of an observer. Ho ho, I kind of went to the porch because of the homosexual portion. Really? Will we travel there? We're going to assume that despite your search for this woman's husband, you have been mistreated by numerous guys. I got him. You didn't even explain your desire for a divorce to him. You didn't even express your desire for a divorce to him. Recently got divorced. Didn't respond to any questions. Yes, indeed, you're suffering a great deal of hurt. And now you're asking, will a woman be with me? What do I think of the conversations she had with Drew about Porsha reportedly having sex with women, or was it Candy? What? It was among them. The tone becomes more serious in this section. After years of sidestepping such claims, the host openly queries why Porsche would suddenly bring up sexuality in the discourse. It is evident how it is framed. We're going there, really? The implication is skepticism rather than curiosity. The critique claims that this moment feels more like repositioning than honesty, an effort to portray long-standing rumors as self-discovery rather than accountability. The term performative enters the conversation at this point. Emotional framing, according to critics, can be used to deflect criticism. It becomes more difficult to ask direct questions without coming across as callous when a story revolves around suffering and recovery. However, many people recalled something different, something older, something recorded, so the inquiry continued. Porsha isn't a coochie, they always said. Here's the problem, though. However, it made me wonder if she was advocating against LGBTQism in the past. Indeed, sir. Indeed, sir. Indeed, sir. Indeed, sir. She preached that it was against God the entire time, didn't she? Are you now debating whether or not to date a woman? These women really need to keep their purses hidden out here. Keep your Birkin hidden. She intends to accept them. Porsha, go ahead. Porsche is shown delivering a Christian sermon in archived footage from before he became famous on reality television. A message that presented LGBTQ identity as something that needed to be saved, fixed, or prayed for. It's a striking contrast. A woman is currently talking about openness, loneliness, and fluidity on one side. Conversely, a woman is reportedly investigating identities that she previously publicly denounced. Critics claim that this isn't growth, it is an unexplained contradiction. The audience took notice. Within hours, clips from that sermon started making the rounds on the internet. Timelines were inundated with side-by-side comparisons. The identical question was asked often in the comment sections. Which version is authentic? Proponents contend that growth isn't linear, that people adapt, and that belief systems shift. Skeptics, however, make a whole different argument. They contend that accountability necessitates clarity and growth necessitates recognition. They also claim that neither has been made available. Rather, stillness ensued. Just the abrupt emergence of a fresh story that conveniently reframed years of whispers as a personal awakening. No explanation, no apology, no background. This aspect of the plot will not die because of this. Because rumors of Porsche's purported interactions with women did not come from fans, according to those familiar with the matter. They are said to have come from persons who were in the same social circles as her. Cast members, production workers, and industry insiders. Once more, none of this has been verified, but the assertion's consistency has drawn criticism. Additionally, consistency is risky since it becomes more difficult to write off everything as coincidence when multiple persons from various locations start telling different versions of the same story. Narratives fall apart at that point. Additionally, the health accusations reappear here as part of a larger pattern of secrecy rather than as a standalone claim. Online rumors indicate that those close to Porsche voiced concerns about her partnership's lack of transparency. physical accountability in addition to emotional transparency. These assertions are still unconfirmed. There is no publicly available documentation. There have been no formal announcements. However, just the notion has changed the tone of public conversation from gossip to seriousness. This goes beyond a person's romantic relationships. It has to do with what they reveal and what they conceal. Legal analysts observe that the stakes drastically shift when accusations enter the help-related realm. Once a rumor turns into danger, what was once amusement turns into a risk. Because of this, a lot of people think that this is the quiet before something much louder, because it's strategic to remain silent at this point. Statements would be measured if a lawsuit were about to be filed. Denials would happen quickly if the proof was weak. Corrections would be forceful if everything were untrue. Rather, there is nothing, which has just increased internet conjecture. Two factions have emerged in the argument. According to one side, Tasha K is taking advantage of controversies by repurposing old stories in order to remain relevant. They cite her history of controversial statements and court cases as evidence that this is a performance rather than the truth. The opposing side contends that because this controversy didn't begin with a leak, it feels different than previous ones. Porsha herself opened the door at the beginning. And as soon as the door opened, individuals entered with invoices, old videos, recorded interviews, and scenes from reality shows that had taken on new significance. Boundaries were blurred in certain moments, and encounters now read differently. This is the risk associated with limited transparency, according to observers. You invite people to tell the remainder of the tale when you share a portion of it. They claim that the remainder is what will happen next. Industry insiders are reportedly planning in private for legal ramifications rather than public fallout, because someone typically tries to regain control when tales spiral this quickly. Letters from candidates are frequently the initial step. There have been private calls and quiet warnings, but none have materialized. This begs another question. Is someone hesitant because they are unsure of what else might come up? Because the dread is now supported by evidence rather than simply accusations. Videos that haven't leaked, messages that haven't been shared, and people who haven't spoken yet. It has to do with pressure. Behind closed doors, pressure is silently growing. Pressure on alliances and reputations. Because a narrative is difficult to reconstruct once it crumbles in public. And the fissures are obvious right now. The sermons do not align with the claims, and the past does not align with the present. The loudness is greater than the silence. And this plot will keep developing until those inconsistencies are resolved. Unanswered inquiries are the reason, not rumors. What hasn't been mentioned is more unsettling than what has. Because the truth rarely comes to light all at once in controversies like this one. It leaks, and it never requests consent when it does. The music fades. This wouldn't appear so protective if it were simply growth. It wouldn't be as loud if it were simply rumors. Certain stories never go away, they hold off. The discussion had progressed well beyond conjecture by this point. Whispers evolved into patterns. After the interviews, the recovered footage, and the revelation of the discrepancies, something undeniable happened, and what had once been disregarded as hearsay began to feel organized. What had begun as curiosity hardened into doubt. The cacophony persisted. It became more intense. When public narratives reach a breaking point, observers notice a typical shift. The tone shifted, silence ensued. It was quieter, more methodical, more controlled, and not messier or louder. There were only well-chosen appearances, well-written posts, and a conspicuous avoidance of details. No emergency declarations, lengthy explanations, or direct answers to the growing accusations. Media analysts claim that this type of quiet is rarely unintentional. It's tactical, because the best course of action is frequently to remain silent and wait for attention to shift elsewhere when accusations become too complicated to categorically refute. However, in this instance, the focus would not go away. Rather, people started making connections. Timelines were reviewed. They rewatched previous episodes. They contrasted the language of the past and present. A recurrent trend of selective disclosure was also seen by many. There were times when answers to inquiries were ambiguous. Moments when factual clarity was superseded by emotive framing. Instances where pity was used to avoid taking responsibility. Critics claim that this was not an unintentional weakness. It had to do with story management, and everything was altered by that vision. Because trust quickly erodes when an audience feels like they are being controlled. Furthermore, trust does not reappear gently after it has been betrayed. There are still two conflicting forces at the storm's heart. Porsha Williams, a reality TV personality whose brand has long been based on transparency, relatability, and emotional access, is on one side. Conversely, Tasha K is a contentious pundit who flourishes in the precarious area between accusation and disclosure. However, neither woman is the focus of this story anymore. It's about what occurs when unresolved history clashes with public personalities. Because the actual issue isn't what has been said, but rather what hasn't, according to people close to the entertainment industry. The idea that talks are taking place behind closed doors is becoming more and more popular. Lawyers, publicists, and network executives have conversations about confinement rather than guilt or innocence. How far will the narrative go? What is the number of participants? And how much can be buried without risk? Industry sources note that the objective is sometimes to freeze rather than to fight when legal teams become active. Stop talking, stop leakage, and stop moving forward. Nevertheless, momentum keeps growing. The internet runs on curiosity rather than silence. Every inquiry that remains unanswered turns into a theory. Every detail that is lacking becomes a clue. And in this instance, the lack of a firm denial has spoken louder than any words could, particularly as more people start subtly implying that they knew things long before the general public did. Just enough advice to keep the flame going, nothing specific or practical. Analysts claim that this stage of any controversy is the riskiest. The implication, not the charge or the proof. Because implication sparks creativity, which fills in the blanks more quickly than facts could. And that's why it feels different right now. Tense, like something on the verge of breaking, but not chaotic or explosive. The issue of legacy is another. Porsha's reputation has been carefully built over the years, not only as a reality star, but also as an empowered person who speaks up, perseveres, and develops. However, some contend that growth necessitates confrontation rather than avoidance. And that's the point at which this tale doesn't end. Because the past has not been directly addressed, even though the narrative has shifted toward healing and self-acceptance. The sermons were not clarified, the inconsistencies were not recognized, and the rumors were not directly addressed. Rather, the audience was asked to proceed without providing answers, and audiences seldom comply, particularly when the stakes are intimate. Because this isn't about celebrity rumors for some viewers. It has to do with accountability, honesty, and whether public figures should be transparent when their actions may have an impact on others. And that's where the unsubstantiated health claims linger menacingly in the background. Not as evidence, not as fact, but as a possibility. A possibility so serious, according to legal experts, that it alters the interpretation of everything else. Because silence ceases to appear impartial once accusations touch on accountability and danger. It begins to appear deliberate, and deliberate silence draws attention. The pressure increases as the days go by. Fans want an explanation. Accountability is demanded by critics. Fairness is demanded by supporters. And there's still no clear answer, so the story is left hanging in an awkward place, unresolved, ignored, and just waiting. Waiting for the next leak, the next video, the next voice that concludes that silence is no longer worth defending. Waiting for someone to blink, waiting for someone to say something. Because this is what history has taught the internet. These kinds of stories never go away. They change. They reappear in surprising ways, at unforeseen moments, frequently when the people involved least anticipate it. It stops in its tracks, leaving only one question that still reverberates more loudly than any accusation. Why hasn't it been shut down if all of this is untrue? And how long can it remain contained if even a portion of it is true? Because stories don't simply mend when they break. They break. Furthermore, the damage doesn't always happen right away when they break. It waits sometimes. A low, menacing hum replaces the music. The accusations themselves are not what makes such stories dangerous. Since silence isn't neutral, it's the silence that ensues. It's not empty, and it's not an accident. Being silent is a decision. And when that decision is made, questions, contradictions, and patterns remain unresolved. People begin searching elsewhere for solutions. The internet can help with that. As a memory, not as a court or a judge. A location where old footage remains intact. Where narratives don't reset because someone wants them to, and where statements from the past don't expire. Sexuality was never the only theme in this tale. Rumors were never the only thing involved. Furthermore, there was never just one interview. It has to do with trust. It has to do with openness. It also concerns the consequences of public figures requesting comprehension without providing clarification. There are two conflicting realities at the moment. One claims that this is all noise, resentment, chasing power, and exaggeration. The other claims that without friction beneath it, noise wouldn't become this loud. The truth is that it seldom makes a sudden announcement. It leaks. It comes to the surface. It waits for the appropriate time. Therefore, whether or not you believe everything you've heard is not the question. The question is much more awkward, but it's also simpler. Why does it keep happening if none of this is important? And who gains the most from the silence if even a small portion of it matters? We'll keep observing. We'll keep an eye on what is and isn't said. And we'll dissect the next piece in precisely the same manner. Just the facts and the questions they pose, without any hype or emotional appeal. If you believe that this is where the story ends, history says otherwise. Some truths wait because they don't go away. Sign up.